Alright, on Captain Castle Laboratory this time, we're taking apart the funhouse again. The motor I made, where I took the shaft out of the other one and put it in here, broke its gear. It's a shame. It does work occasionally, where it grabs and spins like it is now. But here, I can stop the shaft because the gear is cracked. You should not be able to stop those. Those are super high torque. So, I bought a new motor. But, if you remember the reason why, if you watched the last video on this piece, is because you see the size difference there? Look at that. There is a 1/2 inch height difference between the OEM shaft and the new motors. So, I've been devising a way to make the shaft longer without dismantling the motor. So, come up with a couple ideas. This is the screw that holds the spinning devil in right here, and then there's the drum. I actually took him I took him out completely this time versus just twisting him off to the side. I did that so I could actually fix this correctly. So I cleaned this off and then I re-glued it all back together, so now it's got a nice solid bottom. Not that it matters, the screw holds it in place. That's the whole point of the screw. So, to get this 1/2 inch difference, see if I can show you with a ruler. Two motors side by side. If I put it on there, it is just under a 1/2 inch. It's, let's see, from top to top, we are talking 7/16. So going through my drawers of stuff, I either come up with, some I recognize these if you do computers. This is a standoff. It screws into a nut or a board, and then you screw something else onto it and gives it some elevation. The other option is just a screw that I can use a set of nuts as spacers or as a bushing, because I don't have any nuts of this thread. This is a really small metric thread. So these are the smallest nuts I got. No puns there, please. And then I can stack them to take up that space difference. And if I don't want them moving, I can super glue them together so it's a solid weight or a solid bushing. And then, because this screw won't thread in if I use this option, I got some nylon washers. So, because if you look at this screw, it's a pan head. Basically, a washer is part of the head of the screw. So, I could run to the hardware store and spend 20 minutes going through the aisles of stuff trying to find it, or I could just do something here. That's why I'm called the Random Junk Channel and then not the Run to the Hardware Store and Buy Stuff channel. So, which is a shame, because this thing worked for about an hour before the gear snapped, and that's not what I like. I'd like it to work, for a long, long time. An hour is definitely not long enough. So, but anyhow, so this motor, I still have the old parts sitting over there. I can put it back together to this configuration and make sure it still works, because I'm hoping it broke one of the gears I transferred from the old motor. If it didn't, oh well, it is what it is. So, but I think, looking at how high this sits and how many threads I'd have to cut off of it and keep playing with it to get to the right height, I think I'm just going to do the screw. The screw option, where I can adjust the spacing with the nuts versus trying to get stuff just thread into here. Also, from right, this is a different thread pitch. I'll have to get a different screw anyway. Yeah, wait. Yeah, it only goes in a little bit. That's another thing. If you look at the size of that nut that this screws into, it's very shallow. So, if the wheel gets wedged, it could technically unscrew itself. So, I'm trying to avoid future complications. So, if you have to cut this thing down to size, there's a couple of options. You can use a hacksaw. You can use a pair of linemen's. You can use all sorts of things, but If you own a pair of wire strippers, they got these holes in them that are numbered. Those are for shearing screws. So you find the one that's right for yours, which this doesn't appear to have the right size. It might. That might work. And that's what those are for. So if you've never used a pair of wire cutters, or you have a pair of wire cutters and always wonder why there's these weird random holes that they stick inside of them, that's so you can trim machine screws. That's why this one has a huge arc of them. There's 6. Let's see, is this one better? Oh, I got the perfect one right there. So I'll put these away. So how this works is you open it up to where the screw will come through the other side, like that. And when you squeeze it, it shears it. So before I do that, I need to measure how much I need to cut off. Because I cannot have this thing too long and I cannot have it too short. I have to be really, really close to the OEM height. So it's almost 50% the height of this screw. So I'm going to start off at halfway. Now halfway is the shear point between the two jaws, just so you know. So you have to eyeball where the center is, or wherever you want your line to be. So that's about halfway, just like that. Cut it, and then you unscrew this side, like this. Then you drop it onto the transformer. So, and then there's the side to cut off, which is now a itty bitty piece of all thread that you might use for something. And then there's my new shortened screw. So this works really good because it uses threads to hold your screw, and it tells you the size of threads: 630 seconds, 830 seconds, 1030 seconds, 440, 1024, and 540. It gives you the numbers on this one. This one doesn't. This one just says copper conductor only. This one's probably used more for stripping back insulation, since that's what it says next to the holes, which means you put a piece of wire in. Let's see if I have a piece of wire around here. And you find the hole it fits in the best. And then we so it's basically all it does. It's the same thing that this does, just you feed the whole wire in. So if you have a set of wire strippers like this, or similar, that's what those holes are for. If you've never ever used them for that, I've used them a lot for that. So, nylon washers, if you go this route, if you have this piece and you're having the same problem where your motor's died and you can't get a replacement motor, nylon washers, I used to get them at Ace Hardware, and then we actually cleared out a house for somebody who has passed away, and they were a plumber / general handyman, and they literally had sheets. This is just a part of a sheet. The sheets are like 50 of these, and they had sheets, like 10 of them. So I won't run out of those for a really long time. So anyhow, I put the washer on. You can see. And the reason I went with nylon and not metal is to reduce the marring chance. Even though the original one was metal, I just want to use the nylon for the marring. Just got to find a little blade screwdriver, because this new screw is a blade. That's the only thing I didn't pull out in advance when I was setting all this up. There we go. And if you want to know how to take it apart, refer back to the first video. If I remember when this gets posted, I will put a link to it. So there's the screw. And I may not need any of those washers or the nuts. Yeah, I may be wrong. And I'm going to have to put some sort of bushing on here. I need a bushing that's going to fit up inside the plastic shaft. I'm just going to screw it back together real quick just to get an alignment to make sure that this is the correct length I need for this thing to sit. So I'll screw it back down. So with this all the way out, that's going to be pretty close to what I need for how far out it has to go. If I push it in. If I pull it all the way out, I think it's too far. It has to be right about there. So, I need to trim a little bit more off that screw. Not much. And I need to make a bushing. The bushing I might make will just be out of hot glue. I don't know if you ever watched those kind of chintzy 5-minute crafts. They do that a lot. So. Where they show you how to use glue sticks for 400 different ways other than gluing something together. So. But the hot glue also will allow an extra layer of bonding, and it'll come apart easier than using super glue. So I'm going to trim off another couple threads. And just in case you're wondering, this is a 10/32 screw. So I'm just running it flush with the back, which will remove about 2 threads. Like that. There somewhere. Now the other option to make a correct spacer would be to cut off this plastic tail piece. If you cut off the plastic tail piece, you can then sandwich everything together right up against the nose of this, which is another option since this one's already broken. Even though I super glued it back together, it is still an option I have. Because the whole point is to make these things function. Making them look as good as possible too without doing too much damage to the actual product. Trying to get my fingers in there. I can't get my fingers back down there very easy. So, like that. Alright, one more test fit. Now let's just see how far out it is. Now this is a 120 volt unit, if you don't remember or didn't watch the first one. So you got to be very careful with what you're doing, especially since it's plugged in. It's off at the switch, but you can get bleed through, where the switch lets a little bit of current through and gives you a little bit of a tingle. Also, you got to be wary of the components on the board, such as the capacitors. They store the current and the voltage, and if they don't discharge like they're supposed to, they give you a little bit of tingle too. So, there we go. Well, I'm not worried about the lights at the moment. All that those red wires do is go to the transformer, and then the transformer converts it from AC to DC, converts it from 120 volts down to about 12. My concern is just making the motor turn at the moment so I can check it. So just connecting the motor directly to the 120 volt hot, and then much quieter. And if I try and stop the shaft, I can't. Good. So now if you're nervous around high power, anything above like 20 volts is considered high power. It's like 20 or 25 volts is the cutoff. You can always unplug it instead of just relying on the switch. So. There we go. You got to keep, you got 2 holes to pick from, and you got to make sure that the 2 holes are centered between those 2 screw holes, due to the fact that that is the brace that keeps the drum centered. Remember, this is just plastic, so you want to make it snug, but not so snug that you crack it. There we go. And this is the centering brace that goes right there. So this drum, again, if you didn't see the first one, sits like this. Looks like I'm gonna have to go get another screw. I think I did cut this too short. I wasn't paying any, I was trying to line this up with the edge of the plastic, so it'd be right there. Not paying attention that the centering brace has put a groove halfway down this drum, which means it has to sit out here, and as you can see now I have a gap again. Unless I can screw it into this. I have plenty of these screws. I'm sure a lot of people understand when you take stuff apart, you keep the screws. I do. No, I keep most screws, especially if they're fine machine screws. There we go. Nope. Not working good enough. So I also might have this backwards. Nope. I have it forwards. Looks like I might be going back to the drawing board on this one. I really don't want to try and fight with replacing the gear and the other synchronous motor due to the fact that apparently they're slightly different and it broke. But I am wondering if I did cut the bottom off and made a jam nut on the other side, that would keep it more centered, keep it spinning. So I need it to be right there. I'm just using this as a grip. It's because it's slipping in my fingers. There we go. So I tightened it as tight as I could. There we go. So according to the wear groove, This needs to sit right about here. And there's my gap. So if I cut off this plastic, put a screw with a jam nut or a stack of nuts that press up against this face. So if I go get the original length of the screw that I cut, try it again, it may actually work. Since, like I said, I do have several of these small machine screws that are long. And the only other issue I see is the motor is tipped forward on this plate. I need to straighten the plate up. A little heat, I can flex it back into place. That actually worked too. Loosening the screws allowed the plate to flex. So my alignment's a lot better. So I'll probably put a couple of washers right here and down here. Probably just use a nylon one since I have them sitting right here. So we'll space these out so that way the motor stays perpendicular to the platform and this stays perpendicular to the platform, so there's no undue stress put on this, because that's probably how this thing broke in the first place, is flexing. And I'll go get a new long screw and do it again, use some jam nuts. Once I get them all aligned, I'll use some Gorilla Super Glue to hold the nuts in place so they're not just rattling around. But if I have a bushing, I'll double check. I might have some bushings that I can just cut to length. I know I have some brass ones. I'll see if I have some nylon ones. All the bushing would do is slide over the screw and put pressure against the shaft and pressure against the back of this, so that way it cannot move back and forth, and it should just constantly spin whenever it's powered on. So this is going to take, looks like 2 washers there. And 1 washer on the bottom. Trial and error. This is what you have to do when you have something that's too old to get parts for. I can get the right size motor, I just cannot get the right shaft that comes out of the motor. And that's the problem. Screw down. So, this is why sometimes it takes a while to get this stuff done, is because I have to actually make something that will work. Or I have to order parts. Like the motor that was in here that I put in that worked for an hour, then broke. That one, this replacement took 2 weeks to get. It kept getting delayed. It kept saying shipping delay, shipping delay, shipping delay. It's like, great, when am I going to get my motor? So. Might need to it looks like the reason I'm going to need to put the spacers in here is the back of the motor is slightly deeper than the original, so it's pressing on the reinforcements causing it to turn. The original motor was slightly thinner with a longer shaft. The original, not the one I just pulled out. And that's why I need to put spacers or shims in here to make everything stay centered. But when you have something like this, take your time, be patient. I know it's a pain, it gets annoying after a while. Trust me, I'm fully aware. Fix a lot of these. And there are days where I just have to stop and look at it the next day with some fresh eyes. Because sometimes you get so frustrated that you just don't want to do it. But if you're not on some time deadline, relax. Do a couple of trial runs. Nothing. Well, most things don't ever work correctly on the first attempt. I'm going to put 2 on the bottom because I noticed that when I tighten that bottom screw, it had a slight bow. So I'm going to see what 2 does, like the top. It would make sense they both would have the same amount, but I didn't unscrew the bottom near as far as I did the top to get it to square. And take 2. Trying to hold 2 nylon washers with ceramic needle nose. And a barely magnetic screwdriver. Gonna cheat. Glue the 2 washers together. So, it's not that the screwdriver doesn't have a lot of magnetism, it's the type of screw, it doesn't have a lot of magnetism. Nope. Well, I'll get it eventually. But in the meantime, I'm going to let that harden a little bit more, and I'm going to go grab another screw. So I'll be back in just a moment. Alrighty, I'm back. I didn't have any more nylon spacers, but I had some aluminum ones. And I test fit it. It was a hair too long, so I had to cut off that much of it, which is 1/4 of an inch. But this is a straight through aluminum lift block from a circuit board. It's a thread all the way through. It's actually threaded for the screw I'm using it, so it's got this thread on it, so I can show ya. But I was mocking it up to see if it would work. This one may not thread anymore because the threads are damaged. Let's try the all thread, the other end of it. There it is, flush right there. But there you go. So anyhow, what I did is I just threaded the screw through, laid it next to the motor on its mount, and then marked it with a red Sharpie, and then use a hacksaw and a file. Hacksaw to cut it, file to make it smooth. And when I tighten it all up, see how close I am to the ring? So if this was screwed down, it's a hair short, which is probably good, so it won't rub this right here, because that's another problem, is they rub. But if I turn it on, she's turning, she's quiet, she's straight. So by adding 2 spacers here, top and bottom, 2 and 2, and allowing this so this can relax, I now have a straight line with almost no rubbing. Of course, there's going to be some rubbing because the drum isn't perfectly round anymore based on its age. So, and I still have the white washer to help protect the plastic. And then that screw, I just screwed it in the end and then screwed it as tight as I could so that it would compress right here. If you're afraid of it separating, you can actually put a drop of super glue here. If you do something like this, this is just one of many options you saw I was brainstorming live on camera with you, to help bond it. And the great thing about the super glue is it doesn't adhere steel or metals as good as it does plastics and stuff. So this aluminum spacer, if you glue it to this stainless steel shaft, the bond will be there, but it won't be super strong. You'll be able to break it free if you ever have to replace the motor again. Do not put it on the threads though. If you get it on the threads, you're going to have to saw this in half. So just put it on where the flange is, so tighten it as tight as you can, kind of like I did here, and then you can put a drop on it if you're concerned about it coming loose. So, and just going to make sure she's snug. That's all I can turn it. So, but here's an option. May not be the best one for you, but I gave you a couple options of how I was going about it with a long screw and washers, which we didn't end up using because I found I had 2 of these aluminum spacers left. I didn't see that the first time I was looking. Or a board standoff with a screw into it, or a screw with a bushing. Different options, since this only lasted for an hour before I lost the gear inside. So, yeah. New motor, bushing, new machine screw, and you can get this stuff at the hardware store. I'd recommend something like Ace or True Value because they sell singular pieces. So you can get 1 or 2 screws and 1 or 2 pieces of aluminum, or a couple of nuts or washers. You don't have to go to like the Home Depot or Lowe's where it comes in packages of 50 and 100. Most likely you're only going to need it once for this piece, and that's it. So now just needs to be rewired, put back in, clean up all the glue, and then test it inside the house. So that's the next step. And you probably don't need to see it because you probably watched the original video. But it's basically the reverse of taking it apart. That's why I didn't show you how I took it back apart, because I showed you in the other video. So there are 4 screws in the bottom. The 4 screws in the bottom hold the motor and this alignment ring. They don't actually hold the base in. The base is glued, or in the case when I got this one, it was taped. There's clear tape right here. I put it back together with glue, and I will be putting it back together with glue. And if you think that this sign is broken, it's not. It's got a little pin. They pop out. This guy falls off all the time when I move the house upside down. And this guy has got little pins on his hands and feet that fit into the holes in the drum. So it's not broke. It just has some pieces that are pressed in. They're not glued, and they fall out. So anyhow, I'm going to pause this while I cut the wires to the length I need, because this is way too much wire, as you can tell. And I'm going to reassemble and then make sure it works in here. Now, because this doesn't have a gear box that's opened or openable, it's inside here, I will be putting some lubricant on this. If you watched the first video, to do the wearing on plastic, I use the non-stick dry film lubricant for plastic on plastic. Not gear plastic on gear plastic, but plastic bushing. Like this. Because this is rubbing on this plastic, and without some sort of lubrication, it's going to, well, wear the plastic down. Liquid type lubrication like grease, Vaseline, so on and so forth, the problem with those is they collect dirt, dust, hair. So if it's used, especially if you have a house with, like where I am in Arizona, where you can't keep the dust out of, no matter how hard you try, or if you have pets or anything like that, the dust gets inside this ring right here, will slowly make its way across the drum and then right into the grease. Dust and grease turns into concrete. It doesn't do it right away. It takes a while. That's why there's some of the pieces taken apart where the grease is brown and it's really stiff versus the whitish clear grease, which is slimy and gets all over your hands and then things fall out of your fingers. So to mitigate that, I have found that the dry film, because it's dry, doesn't collect dust as much. It still will. Everything gets dusty, but the dry film works good for stuff like this. You do not have to get a big old can like I did, because I also use this on castings when I was trying to cast that gear as a release agent, because that's what they recommend. That's why I bought the big can. I planned to try cast the gear like 40 times. And then Happy Holiday Parts and John Klug made me a set. And I'm like, well, somebody else already has the mold. There's no point in me wasting my time doing it some more. But that stuff works good for stuff like this. So it'll be just a moment, and I'm going to go ahead and get this thing put back together and do a final test. And my final test is I'm going to let this thing run probably for hours to make sure it doesn't fail again, because I hate returning products that fail. Luckily, this one's local. Most of the times the ones I ship, they are parts that I acquire from Amazon or eBay, and they fit. But on some of these synchronous motors, especially if you watch the Lemax City Scenes, City Lights, or City Walk, or whatever it's called, they don't make it anymore. They don't make it anymore. It's got a short shaft. They don't make the long shaft anymore. I'm not the only one that's been looking for one. And this isn't like I just started looking today or last week. I started looking when I got the house originally. And also, I needed it for that Cityscapes. I needed a 9-volt long shaft, and I ended up just rebuilding it because they don't make them anymore. So you got to do what you got to do. And if you don't want this piece, just unscrew it, disconnect the wire nuts, take these wires out, whatever color they may be on the motor that they put in there, and then this drum won't turn, but you'll still have your lights, because this is your lighting controller right here. But anyhow, so I'll return in a moment. Enough rambling on. Let's get this thing done so we can check it again. All right, it's all back together. Except for the sign, but that's easy. Sign just goes right there. And lights off. There we go. So once everything was set, I put some dry film lube onto the ring, like I said I was going to again, since I did it the last time, but I've been manhandling it, so it's wiped off. LED still worked. There, there, and there. The white light illuminates that window, and the background green, and some of the escaping light around the doors. So this one's nice and quiet. I'm sure you could, if you remember the beginning of the video, this one's a lot quieter. So it's a lot more work than what I did the first time. And taking apart a motor isn't the easiest, but and it took a lot more attempts. But after whatever 3 or 4 attempts, it now functions. Now it is about a 1/16 of an inch farther back from this face than it used to be, which is fine, at least in my eyes, because that barrel has rubbed on the inside of this porcelain or resin tree fascia. Probably when that piece of plastic broke and it started wobbling like this on there, it was just rubbing. So we're going to stop that from happening by pushing this back a hair, and it's basically one thread on that screw, but you really can't tell the difference unless you're really looking for it. So, and if you remember the last video, if you watched it, I pulled the cords out of the bottom, like, and adjust. There we go. This loop, I pulled it out because that loop was pushing onto the wires that broke all these LEDs and made them non-functional. So this thing is whisper quiet now, just like it's supposed to be. So if you have this piece and you cannot rebuild the synchronous motor, don't. Just get a motor and play around with some stuff, make a spacer, a bushing, some sort of adjustment to the shaft. You can put a lock washer in there to help hold it so it doesn't break free. Dab a super glue. Don't put it on the threads though. So as far as this goes, it's back to normal. It's fully functional. It's nice and quiet, which is the whole point. So I'll call this one done again. And now I need to let it sit here and play for a while. So I'll give it like a half an hour, or maybe a little longer. Make sure that it works. I don't think we'll have any problems with it since there's no noise. There's no scraping. There's no grinding. So anyway, this concludes the second time of working on the Haunted Funhouse from Department 56. And another way to make that barrel spin with the character inside versus trying to take the motor apart and put the old part back in, to three or four different designs or styles to make the shaft longer, which, you know, it's working. So, but anyhow, thanks for watching. Until the next one, hopefully it's not one I've already done, but until the next one, have a good one.